Let's have a look at how we can manage digital objects and time-based media, both in analog and digital format, within Vernon CMS. Within our collections, we're increasingly dealing with objects where their original format is digital, often referred to as born digital items. Often that'll be digital media, so images, video, and sound files, but it can incorporate other kinds of content. For instance, an email might be captured in digital form, and you might record that in the correspondence file within Vernon. Things like websites and electronic records are other examples of born digital content. One of the things that sits on top of digital content is digital preservation. And this covers the processes to ensure that digital information of continuing value remains accessible and usable in the long term. Digital preservation sits outside of what we would normally manage in Vernon CMS, but these are processes that you need to be following to ensure the integrity of the digital files in your collection. Digital preservation covers three broad layers, so I'm going to briefly go over these. The first level is called bitstream preservation, and that's ensuring that you can read the files and that the files themselves are protected. You need to maintain the media on which you're storing them. So for example, if you're storing them on a hard disk, that hard disk might need to be periodically checked for errors, and it might need to be upgraded or replaced periodically. You also need to be checking that the files are valid, and there's methods of having check bits to see that the actual bits in the file match what you originally had, and you need to be ensuring that you're backing up those files. A great baseline for backups is what's referred to as the 3-to-1 backup policy. And that's a concept where you have at least 3 different copies of each file, stored on 2 different storage media, with one of those at least being off-site. So a typical process might be that your files are stored on a hard disk on your server in your network, and then you might have a daily backup process. That might be backing those files up to the cloud every night. And so as long as you're keeping at least 2 copies of those in the cloud, then you're meeting that 3-to-1 principle. You've got 3 different copies in 2 different places, one of which is off-site. The second layer of digital preservation is logical preservation. And that's ensuring that you have a method of accessing and playing the digital content as time goes by. So that might be ensuring that you migrate the files to a different format if an existing format is no longer playable on current devices. Or in some cases, you may even need an emulator to be able to play those files. A popular example is the MAME format, which stands for Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator. And that's a system that emulates the hardware to run interactive content, particularly arcade and console games. The last layer of digital preservation is semantic preservation, and that covers the describing of the digital resources. So giving information so that you can easily re-find them again in the future, and providing additional contextual detail. And so this is the layer that Vernon CMS is primarily concerned with. At this point, I'm going to switch to our demo system, where we've got some example catalog records. And I'll show you how we can catalog examples of a digital film and a digital image. Because of that additional contextual information, I'll be able to find these digital assets. So for example, I'll bring up a photograph of an item in our natural sciences department, an example of a particular type of mineral. So the digital image didn't have this text data, but each of these digital objects needs an object record like we would have any physical item in the collection. And it's through that object record that we can then provide this additional contextual information. So we can see I've added in a title for the item, and then I've made use of the brief description to describe in more detail what that particular item is. I can make use of fields like the object type field to be clear about what type of content this is. So I've marked it as being a photograph, but I've been more specific and said that that's a digital photograph. I can also make use of the classification field if I'm wanting to create more detailed hierarchies organizing the content, including the content that's digital. Because that's a repeatable field, I've been able to mark that as being both a photograph under photographic media, and I've been able to identify the particular mineral type that's represented in that. So if I later search for all the items in the collection that represent that certain category of minerals, I'll be able to find this photograph as part of that. I can also make use of the format keywords field if I'm wanting to describe very specifically what the digital or analog format of the content is. So here I've marked it as being a JPEG file. On the left-hand side, we have the other screens available for continuing to catalog this record. So we've got the object record with all of this descriptive information. And for digital content, that's always going to link to another record in the photo, audio, visual file for all the technical information about that specific digital file. So let's click on the photo, audio, visual window, and we can see the link to that related record. If I click on that, I can use the Go To button on the top toolbar to jump to that related photo record. In the photo record, we've got fields where we might give a specific caption for that one file. That can be useful in cases where you've got multiple digital images linked to one object record, and you want to give specific captions to each individual image. I can also mark what public access this image should have, and that's a field that's automatically made use of in our Vernon browser web module. I might have production information, such as who was the photographer, and I might want to include things like a credit line. Lastly, Vernon CMS is able to automatically pull data out of that image file. It's using an international standard called EXIF, which embeds all kinds of technical and production information into that file at the point that it's created. So we can see, for instance, detail about whether or not the camera flash was on or off at the time that that photo was taken. We can see the device that it was recorded on. So it's an iPhone photo, and we can see the precise time that that photograph was originally taken. Lastly, back on the object record, I might want to put additional subject information to help us find that record and group it together with other things. So on the subject page, we can record a whole lot of different categories, including where it was taken, matching it to particular events, dates, and subject categories. So here I've marked it as falling within 2 different subject categories. Those digital images can be linked one by one to catalog records in the object file, but we can also bulk link them. On the Tools menu, we can go to Imaging, Import and Link Images to bulk match images that we've created and stored in a folder on our network to the appropriate object record. So this process just lets us pick a folder, and Vernon will automatically look at all of the images in that folder and create photo records for them. And then it'll use the file name to try and match to things like the system ID of an object record or the accession number of an object record. And there's a whole lot of logic there for dealing with variations that you might have in the file names, discarding extra text that might be at the end, or replacing certain characters to correctly match how you've recorded the accession numbers back in the object records. I'll next open up a record that documents one of our digital video files. I'll search by artist because I've already added that additional contextual information. So this is a 1935 film that was originally recorded in analog format on 35mm film, but the only copy we have in the collection is a digital format. I've linked to two different digital files. I've got a still from the video as the first linked file, and then I've also got the video file itself. It starts with a short section of black leader film at the beginning, which is why the first frame's black, but I can double click on that to open up the full original video. Video files that are linked to Vernon can be opened up directly within the application, but there is a limit within Windows networks as to how big a video file you can open in that format. If you had very large videos, ones that are, say, in the gigabytes of size, then you should be considering a media server, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Again, we can see that I've made use of fields like the object type and the description to give more background information about this record and to categorize it. On the second tab, I've described the medium and I've given more description about what the original copy was before it came to our collection. And then I've also created a measurement type for running time. So measurements are typically used for things like dimensions, but you can create custom measurement types, including this example where I'm tracking hours, minutes, and seconds. Again, I've used the format keywords to mark what particular type of file that is, and I've put in some detail about what the original format was. I could next go to the media page to see other information that I've recorded about this type of film. So one of the things we have available on this page is the timecode table. So if you're wanting to mark particular times within an audio or video recording where certain things happen, this is where you can do that. So each of those slots, we can describe a particular title that marks what's happening at that point in the movie. And then we can say the time period that it covers and any additional notes. So this is a film that was done as a promotional film for the General Post Office in the UK. And partway through that film, there's a price list of the current services. And so we've taken just a text snapshot from that video of the text that appears at that point in the film and detailed the time that that's happening. We might also note any display requirements. Here we've put the desirable minimum projector that we need if we're going to be presenting that film, perhaps within an exhibition. We can also make use of the document references page to link to external resources. This is a film that's now out of copyright, and it's actually publicly available on the Internet Archive, and so that's what the first link is. There's also a public Wikipedia page about the artist, and I've put that as a second link. Any of these external files you can double click, and if it's a document or resource on your own network, it will open it up in the appropriate file viewer. If it's an internet web link, it'll just open up as a web page. Next, on the digital aspects page, I can put other technical details. So for instance, we might know the particular color format of film that was used. We might also want to describe any additional technical data. So technical type is just a table where you can freely create your own categories to mark any additional technical information. So that might be details of specifications of that file or that format. So here we can see that I've put in a keyword as to what type of color film stock was used, and then some additional notes beside it. On the last tab, I've noted the scale of that film, so we can put the aspect ratio, and we know that that film is in sound with some additional notes about what sound features in the recording. Again, I can make use of the subject file as well to put in subject keywords for things like the category and the place. So here I've just marked it as abstract, so I could search for all of the things in our collection where it fell under the abstract category. Lastly, we could make use of user-defined fields. These are spare fields that are available in every system and can be configured to match requirements of your own custom collection items. The system supervisor gives each of these user-defined fields a label, at which point it becomes active in the system. So these fields on the first tab haven't been enabled, but I have set up a custom field for describing any special features in a moving image. So for instance, if you had a DVD copy, as well as the original film, there may be other pieces of content that are available as special features on a DVD, and you could note them in a user-defined field. Lastly, we can also record accessories in the collection, which are used to help us work with these digital objects. I can view those through the Object Accessory window, and that's just another kind of object record. So for accessories, you can still track things like locations. You can link them to activities such as loans and exhibitions. I've catalogued an example of the projector. On the first page of the accessory window, we can see that same technical type table that we saw before in digital aspects, and I have noted some technical details of this projector. So the first column is just authority keywords where you can create any terms that are relevant to you. So I've made terms for voltage, resolution, and light output. The accessory window allows us also to link to related objects. So I've specifically marked that that film of Len Lye's is connected to the projector, but I can limit that to a particular time period. So this is the period when that particular film was being displayed and was using that projector as part of the exhibition. I can then make use of the other standard fields describing maybe what the construction of that projector was, what the size is, and importantly in this case, I've marked a consumable component. Consumables in Vernon CMS are replaceable pieces of objects. That could be objects in your permanent accession collection, or it could be an accessory in this case. So I've marked in this case a set of light bulbs that need to be periodically replaced in this projector, and I've recorded when they were last replaced, when I'm estimating they will next be replaced, and some notes. So this particular projector requires 6 bulbs. That consumable column is linking to a related file in the system where we can put as much detail as we want about each type of consumable that we need to track. So again, I can use that Go To button to see all of the related details about that type of consumable. So I'll put a brief description, a lifespan and a cost. And then most importantly, I've linked that to the person and organization record for the supplier. So there may be a specific supplier, maybe somebody quite obscure where you go and get a particular piece that is periodically replaced in one of your items of equipment or one of your permanent collection objects. Because that's linking to the person database, you can then record the contact information about that supplier. This is an online company, so I've just recorded the web address where we go and order those light bulbs. So that's an example of digital images and digital films and the related projector which we're using along with the film. One of the extra things that we can do is automatically take that metadata that's been pulled out of the image and write that to specific fields in the photo audio visual file. That's chargeable customization work depending on what fields you're wanting and what kinds of formats they are in the original image. But this screenshot is a typical example of what we've done for some clients. We've taken information like the caption, the publication status, production information and credit line from that digital metadata, and then automatically written that to the right fields in Vernon CMS via a script that we've written for that client. So that's a script which is manually run, but just periodically, perhaps once a month, to refresh that information from the digital files. That's a process that's particularly useful if you're using a digital asset management system to keep track of those files and add additional information into them. So some of the digital asset management systems can automatically embed this information in the files, and this path provides a way to get that all the way through to Vernon into specific fields in the photo file. I mentioned that if you have large video files, you could consider a streaming service. So YouTube and Vimeo are examples of public streaming services. So you can upload a very large video to those, and then when you're playing it, it's only accessing the portion of the video that you're currently up to with a short buffer ahead of where you're up to. You can also set up the same kind of thing on a hosted media server. So that's again still in the cloud, but it can be used to manage private video files. And then lastly, both Microsoft and Amazon produce media servers which can be run in-house. So you'd be installing that on your own internal network, and then you'd have the ability to stream very large video files internally. Video files that are on a public streaming service like YouTube can also be embedded within Vernon browser. So here's an example within the Museum of Transport and Technologies collection. So this is the page for that collection item within Vernon browser, and we can see a button right at the top to say that there's a video. Back in Vernon CMS, that's just using that document references page, linking to YouTube as one of the external files. And then we've customized their website so that if there is a YouTube video for a particular item, it enables this button, and that's a shortcut to get to the part of the page where we've got that particular video. In this case, it's one of the police helicopters in their collection. And we can see on YouTube a video about how that particular item was moved when they first acquired it. As with your physical objects, you still need to think about deaccessioning with digital items. So usually deaccessioning is something you're going to think about at the time you acquire it. Are you actually going to go ahead with the long-term storage of this particular item? But considering whether you're retaining it can be an iterative process. For example, you might periodically, every 5 to 10 years, give a review of all of the digital content that you've got and decide whether any of that no longer holds value. So depending on how well it still matches the collection policy, what the costs are for storing that item, how valuable it is compared to the rest of the collection, there may be cases where even in the medium term, you change the policy and decide you are no longer going to keep that digital file. Lastly, to wrap up, I've got links to a few different useful pieces of resources. On Wikipedia, there's an excellent overview of digital preservation covering all of the key steps, right the way from when you would first consider an item and perhaps accession it into your collection, and then the processes for ensuring that the files are valid and are preserved in the long term. There's also a number of different guides for how museums can specifically manage digital collections. One excellent example is Collections Trust, the national museum organisation within the UK that provides standards on a whole range of different museum processes. They've produced a toolkit for managing digital collection objects. So that's a lengthy PDF which goes into every step that's involved with managing these different types of files. So that's again well worth a look. In a similar vein, there's one for the archive sector that's produced by Archives New Zealand.